Let's get the latest from US political reporter for the Daily Mail, Victoria Churchill. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. You were there on Saturday night. It was unsettling, but journalists are a rather hardy bunch, and those who weren't just taking the unopened bottles of wine from the table below to drink them in the bar upstairs, and there were a lot of people doing that, were filing copy very quickly to tell their publications what had happened. Your thoughts, first of all, on Saturday night, Vic, for anybody that didn't see you on GB News since then, and your reaction to what Caroline Levitt said today about this left-wing cult of hatred.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely an event for the ages. It was my first White House Correspondents Dinner. Definitely not one that I will ever forget. Unfortunately, for reasons that I wish were different. But, my personal experience at the dinner, I was seated towards the back, so I was pretty sure that where those gunshots rung out were pretty close to where I was, just on the other side of the door. As I've told folks, and I've said on this show multiple times, I'm actually somebody that participates in the shooting sports, goes to gun ranges. And so, where I think this is relevant to this event and this evening is that I knew right away that those were gunshots. By my count, it was 3 or 4 gunshots that I heard. And then, of course, as we've all seen the footage since then, that was what would have been the return fire from Secret Service agents. You just named 5 shots. So if that does match up with, my timeline, maybe it was kind of not the first one that we heard and whatnot. And then, of course, what we did see was Secret Service did not actually hit the assailant, which, I think is interesting. Again, kind of looking at it from a little bit more of a tactical perspective, if you will. You can kind of see at one point when this guy is charging through where those magnetometers are. At one point, the agent that is closest to him has his gun pointed at him, but he has 3 agents beyond the target. And so what you're taught when you train with firearms is know your target and what's beyond it. And so in my interpretation, that is why that agent did not fire. And then it was the secondary agent, the line of defense, the guy that you kind of saw get down lower and do that continuation of the shot. It seems like he is probably the one that got closest to shooting the target, because he was shooting, at least from the footage that I've seen, into an area where there was not further Secret Service agents.
And what do you think of what Caroline Levitt said today in the briefing room? She called an unexpected briefing today. She went off on maternity leave on Friday. She wasn't meant to be coming back. She's due to have her baby this week, but she said she thought it was so important to come and talk to the world today after the events of Saturday, particularly to talk to the press, because of course it was all of us that were there on Saturday night. And she did not hold back, Victoria, in her criticism of left-wing commentators, politicians, agitators, who she sees as playing a part in this. Do you agree?
I mean, look, I think that people can read people's words. I don't want to kind of go back and escalate this rhetoric further myself. And I know that this is something that we are all trying to do on this show, is, we're trying to have civil debates, but, who's said what. For example, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, he is one, in my view, been one of the worst offenders in terms of politicians. But you really have seen politicians all up and down the country, in my view, painting Republicans as the devil, as Nazis. And hopefully this is going to stop. But I think this is also what you heard after Butler and what you heard after Charlie Kirk, and it has not stopped. And so, I think what I've been pointing out is that the thing that makes this different for me is that, I can tell you, as somebody that has done probably close to a dozen media hits, probably about half of those on GB News since, about 9 o'clock Saturday night, is that the journalists were part of the story, which is not typical in our line of work. We're there observing. But again, what we've seen since, with the manifesto in particular, is that this lunatic, if you will, if I can call him that, he was there intent to harm significant numbers of people. And kind of what I've been pointing out to people that were not in attendance, and something that the cameras may not have captured too well or people might not be paying attention to, is that, of course, you saw the principals at the top of the room, the head table, the president, Melania, the vice president, Caroline, and then as well as leaders of the Correspondents Association. But actually what you had for other cabinet officials is they were scattered throughout the room. And so, kind of extrapolating beyond what did happen, if this guy had gotten into the room and he had been aiming for other cabinet members, he would have been shooting probably through people like you and I, Bev, the journalists.
Yeah.
He specifically said they were not his target, but he was intent on reaching his target. And with the way that we were all interspersed, there's no way he could have aimed for people and not hit any of us. At my table, there was not a cabinet secretary, but the Daily Mail, we were split across 3 tables. And so we had FBI Director Kash Patel at one of the tables with my colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a disaster was averted, Victoria, there's no doubt about it. And he was in court today. Victoria Churchill from the Daily Mail US, thank you so much for joining us on The Late Show Live. We will see you in the studio very soon, I am sure.